Walt Disney presents... Concho, the Coyote Who Wasn't. And now your host, Walt Disney.
People often ask us where we find our stories about animals. And our answer is that nature herself writes them. The wonders of nature are endless. Sometimes we can recognize ourselves in animals. And one of the moments that we can understand and sympathize with is when an animal faces something new and must rise to an unusual challenge. That's our story now. It's called The Coyote Who Wasn't. And as you can guess, it's about a coyote who wasn't quite a coyote. Or maybe we should say about one who was more than a coyote. Now, you know, the coyote is a very clever animal. And generally speaking, people tend to underestimate him. That's because they don't really know him. The fact that he's still around when a lot of other creatures have become extinct speaks for his ability to adapt to new situations and to get along with man. In some ways, he's very much like his cousin, the dog. He's smart, he has the ability to learn, and when treated with kindness, he can show a certain kind of loyalty. Now, if you were to put a coyote with sheep, generally you could expect trouble. But when an old Navajo Indian tried it, well, let's see what happened.
Folks, you're looking at Red Rock country, a piece of territory stretching off in every direction, just about as far as the crow can fly. Navajo land, it's called. It's not easy to live in, poor for crops, rough on horses and cattle, but passable for hardy critters like sheep and goats. And so, its oldest settlers, the ancient Navajos, long ago took up the ways of the herdsman. Like in the Old Testament, they go wherever their flocks take them. For a fair span of years, almost too many to stop and count them, old Delgado had followed the sheepman's simple existence. His days were peaceful, his nights without care. Except when the call of the coyote came echoing off the mesas. Bothered the old fella to miss an easy target like this. But then, he wasn't the crack shot he used to be. Well, if Mr. Coyote was going to be loose in these parts, he'd spend the night outside and keep on guard. It was times like this that he missed his old dog, Concho. In the old days, Concho wouldn't have let a coyote come within a mile of the place. But by now, he was probably chasing sheep in some faraway, happy hunting ground. The next morning, barely sunup it was, a ruckus came over the hill sounding like the whole United States cavalry out on a shooting spree. Well, Well, sir, it was the bounty hunters. And at the moment, they appeared bound and determined to exterminate every living thing in the landscape. A family of coyotes was on the run. Smart old Mother Coyote was using every gully and coulee she could find to hold up the pursuing posse. Rough ground wasn't going to delay these fellas for long. Wherever the quarry went, they were raring to follow. What they didn't know, though, and what the young coyote wasn't about to advertise, was that the last bullet had nicked him in the hind leg. He'd have to rest a bit and catch his breath before going on. Delgado, this seemed a crazy business, this bounty hunting. All that wild shooting and nothing to show for it. Then he heard a sound that kind of puzzled him. Well, now, what was a man to do with a helpless critter like this? Maybe it was the pup's spirit, the stare you down square in the eye look. Whatever it was, the next thing the old Navajo knew, he was toting the youngster back home, not really having any idea what he'd do with him. It was just that the little fellow was down on his luck and needed help. In country lonely as this, you sort of have to do your own doctoring at times. And now Delgado cooked up a special brew of his own devising, secret formula, private stock. It was powerful, potent stuff, good for man or beast. And guaranteed to snatch your breath away. Well, sir, somewhat to the old man's surprise, that pup took to it like it was his mother's own milk. Cure you or kill you, he didn't seem to mind which. In a few days, the pup was himself again, chipper and curious and friendly as they come. A coyote is like that. Show him a little kindness, and he'll meet you more than halfway every time. Like all young'uns, this one's main interest seemed to be in something to eat. Delgado let him have whatever he wanted, for it was good to have a dog around again, or a sort of a dog. The old man figured maybe he ought to have a name of some kind, so he called him Concho Número Dos, Concho number 2, and gave him his own spot by the fire. Well, that was fine. But Concho had it figured that if you were going to throw in with a man, partners, you ought to stick close to him. Just about as close as you could get. In the days that followed, young Concho watched everything that went on, not always catching the why of things, but curious anyhow. Of course, he didn't know much about the Indian way of making jerky, by hanging the meat out to dry in the sun. All he knew was it looked mighty tempting. At the same time, he seemed to sense it wasn't meant for him. Smart animal, that Concho. The thing that mystified him most was the way the old Indian chased after his sheep. Round and round they went, like it was some sort of game. It looked like fun, but Concho figured he'd best keep out of it. No sense being underfoot and in the way when you don't know what the point is. The point, of course, was to get the ornery critters into the corral. But there's times when a cantankerous old ewe can think of a million reasons for not going where you want her to. Well, sir, hazing a bunch of stubborn sheep can sure tire a man out, especially when he's got to do it single-handed. So once the job got done, Delgado found himself a shady place for a little siesta. Concho, meanwhile, traipsed off by himself, not going anywhere special, just running loose in the sunshine without a care in the world. Then he met up with a couple of strangers. were javelinas, or wild pigs. Not so wild, but what they look like they might be fun to travel with a while. Long as they were going his way anyway, Concho figured the latch string was out and invited them in. What he wasn't smart enough to realize was he'd just bought himself a peck of trouble. Now, trouble has a way of begetting more trouble. And sure enough, here it came. Some wild boars. There's nothing genteel about a wild boar. He's either scrapping or he's scratching. He's a fellow for personal comfort on a kind of a mutual basis. Well, sir, you put a bull in a china shop and a pig in the pantry, and you'll get about the same result. Pure chaos. And you get no thanks for your hospitality either. Well, sir, by the time Delgado got in on things, the fat was in the fire, and the water barrel had more holes than a sieve. Delgado had it figured out pretty quick. No mistaking a pig's autograph. But that didn't excuse Concho one bit. What kind of a watchdog was this? A pup that'd pal around with pigs wasn't much use to anybody. Came time next day to take the sheep to their watering place. Delgado was pretty much occupied with getting them started, and he didn't at first pay much attention to Concho. The pup, assuming he was part of it, fell in behind, ready for the journey wherever it was to take him. But that wasn't in Delgado's plans at all. He'd had about enough of this nuisance. Some folks, you have to sort of hit them over the head to get your point across. And some coyotes, you throw them a stick, they think you've lost it, and they're supposed to bring it back. Now, the pup went back and sat on the doorstep, the way a dog will. Near as he could figure out, that's where he belonged. What Concho had missed out on, it so happened, was the one chance of the week to get cool. In country dry as this, water sort of keeps things going, and the trip to the water hole was something man and beast counted on. Concho could have used a little of this, no doubt about that. Time passed. Concho was getting thirstier all the time, but he never left his post. As long as he stuck it out here at home base, the man would have to come home sometime. Bygones were bygones, it seemed. If anyone had asked Delgado, he'd probably have admitted he missed the little devil. So the friendship was back on an even keel and running smooth again. Over the next couple of months, they got along fine, man and Coyote. And wherever Delgado went, Concho went along too. By now, Concho had sprung up to half-grown size, and he had no trouble at all keeping up. It wasn't that he did much, no more than tag along, but the sheep had gotten used to him, and he'd gotten used to them. And the whole shebang went along like a traveling picnic. When you're tending sheep, you can practically expect the unexpected to happen when you least expect it. That's what was happening now. The flock was splitting up. Some mavericks took off on their own, thinking the stubborn old ewe in the lead was going somewhere important. The sheep followed their leader, Delgado followed the sheep, and Concho followed everybody. For a while, it looked as though those sheep weren't going to stop this side of the next county. Then, for no apparent reason, they hauled up short. It was then that Delgado figured out a way to head them off. That's how Concho got his start being a sheepdog. Through no fault of his, really. He didn't know he was herding sheep, but the maneuver had worked just as if he had. Traveled with the flock, the more he seemed to catch on to the idea that the sheep were supposed to stay together. And a good thing, too, because this was bobcat and cougar country, and no place for the lambs to be straying off. But the real test was yet to come. The strays that are hard to handle aren't the playful lambs, but the old ladies with a mind of their own. Critters like old Blackface, the stubborn one, who was forever going off looking for greener pasture. Delgado thought he'd try Concho. No guarantee a coyote'd know what was expected of him, but no harm in asking. Well, sir, that coyote had been learning more than he showed. Somewhere along the line, he'd figured the whole thing out. Delgado was proud as could be. And right then and there, he began to see a real future for his coyote partner. One morning, they were watching some wild burras, a mother and her colt. And suddenly, the little fella got to feeling his oats and took off cross country like he owned it. Concho had it figured that a stray was a stray, no matter who, and it followed naturally that he was the one supposed to go round it up. Old Delgado didn't bother to set him straight. Good experience for Concho. He'd wait and see how he made out. Sheepdog can nip a sheep on the heels and nothing much happens. But he'd try nipping a wild burra, and he just might get his head knocked off. Enough of that. Concho figured he'd get back to his woolies where he belonged. He didn't mind being a hero, but he didn't favor getting killed at it. More and more as the summer ran on, Concho was proving he was a coyote who wasn't a coyote, but a darn good sheepdog. And more, Delgado simply gave the orders and Concho would carry him out. He had learned that sheep need steering as well as chivying. And the way to do it was to get around in front of them and turn them where you wanted them to go. And so it was. Whenever they'd stop at a line camp far from the home corral, Concho knew exactly how to tuck the flock in for the night. He'd hold them in the temporary corral till Delgado'd come and lock the gate, exactly as any good sheepdog would. Now, Man and Coyote were a smooth-working team. Concho had earned his spurs for sure. By all rights, he was now numero one. Come nightfall, the old Indian sort of felt his years and all the day's walking. And when it was bedtime, he liked such comforts as he could contrive out of the makings at hand. Now, roughing it is generally rough enough to start with without putting up with practical jokes from your friends. But sometimes it takes a little horseplay to liven up the monotony of camp life. The weeks drifted on and everything went along without a hitch. The main job of the sheep herder is to find good graze and good water. Long as he can supply those two items, the flocks have to be pretty well behaved. So when things were calm and peaceable like they should be, Delgado often took his rest beside the one creek in the whole neighborhood. There's just something soothing about the sound of running water. Suddenly, a commotion bigger than a mere trickle of running water put Delgado on the alert. Turned out it was nothing more than a passel of wild mallards dropped in for a swim in the only water for miles around. Then something else happened. Another coyote popped up. A wild one, going after a duck dinner. This wild hunter was a female, but no lady necessarily. She made a right good try for the bird. For once, though, she'd overmatched herself. Let a duck get in the water, and he's pretty hard to catch. She'd known it herself, almost from the beginning. So she chucked the whole thing. It was about then that she caught sight of Concho, and things started to happen. The first coyote Concho had ever seen suddenly became most interesting to him. Delgado had known it would happen sooner or later. The call of the wild. But for him, it couldn't have happened at a worse time. For now, disaster was threatening. A killer loose among the sheep. A second wild coyote trying to cut out one of the lambs. For Delgado, it was a bad moment. He'd lost his coyote sheepdog right when he needed him most. Then suddenly, Concho came busting back. Concho to the rescue. Was kind of set back on his heels. What kind of a coyote was this? One of his own kind chasing him off the sheep? It sort of threw him off his whole plan of attack. Like the good sheepdog he was, Concho answered the signal and came back on call. Now the partnership was a tried and tested thing. And so the long summer passed. Now it was time to take the sheep to market. Working together, Delgado and Concho pushed the flock toward the high country, for the trading post where they'd meet the buyer was on the far side of the mountains. They'd be days on the trail, and water stops were few. Drank when you had the chance, paying no mind to the fact that your drinking water was the color of coffee. Higher and higher they went, climbing toward the pass. Up ahead, it looked threatening. And as Delgado had half expected, they soon met snow. there she was, Black Falls Trading Post, sheep trading center for all the territory for miles around. As civilization, it wasn't much, but it was the first Concho'd ever seen. And quite unthinking, he moved into town. Of course, the sight of a coyote so close sent the Indian dogs crazy. A coyote loose in a sheep town was sure to liven things up and provide a little excitement. To the Indian bystanders, this was first-class entertainment. Well, Concho had one friend he could turn to. And being near desperate, he turned to him now for help and protection. If there was to be any peace for Concho, it was up to him to prove he was something more than a plain everyday coyote just wandered in off the range. He had to demonstrate something unheard of, and it wasn't going to be easy winning over an audience of outright skeptics. It wasn't likely they'd believe a sheep's worst enemy could also be his friend. Well, the only way to decide it was to let Concho do a sheepdog's work. This meant cutting out certain animals for the buyer. And it also meant holding back the ones Delgado wanted to keep. It took savvy and skill and footwork and a good sense of timing, because sheep can be mighty quick when they're riled up. By the time he was through, Concho had won the vote of everybody, including even his severest critic. Later in the day, the buyer drove up with his truckload of new-bought sheep, some of which belonged to Concho. Leastwise, he thought they did. Who does this fella think he was, trying to steal Delgado's sheep? Well, that little set-to sort of clinched it. Everybody agreed this was one right fine sheepdog. When he'd settled his yearly account with the trader, Delgado had one last little fling in the big town. He blew a chunk of money on something he'd wanted all year long. He figured he'd earned it, he and Concho. Anyone could see a man with a sombrero big and broad as this was a success. It sort of made him 10 feet tall. And so Delgado and Concho headed out, the two of them aiming for home. A good season behind them, and another year ahead. Working together as a team the way they always did, they kept their sheep bunched and protected and moving. The ageless old Navajo and the coyote who wasn't really a coyote.
Well, as you've seen, there's many a tall tale that turns out to be true. The old Indian and the coyote went back to their home range. And as far as we know, Concho's there yet, rounding up the sheep just as well as any sheepdog that ever lived.